What do you get when you take BMW's smallest SUV, the X1, and make it even smaller and more coupe-like? Well, you get this, the BMW X2. Jared here with carbuzz.com, and today I am reviewing the 2018 model BMW X2, which BMW calls a Sports Activity Coupe. So this technically isn't an SUV, although we all know what it is an SUV. But basically what BMW has done here is they have taken the smallest SUV in their lineup, the X1, and they've given it a much lower roofline, some sportier details, all to make it a more appealing package for younger buyers who want the looks of a two-door coupe, but they also would really like an SUV. It's what BMW has been doing ever since they came out with the X6, which was basically a coupified X5. They now have this and the mid-size BMW X4, which is based on the X3. Now you're going to pay about $2,500 more than an X1 for the honor of having this more coupe-like roofline that is actually going to impede your visibility, your trunk space, your room in the rear, all in the pursuit of looking better. And doing that job, I think BMW is actually very successful. I think this is a very good looking car. It comes in a number of really interesting color options, including this option, which is sunset orange metallic, which I think is really nice on this car. They do a nice blue as well that I think is really pretty. It has some unique touches, such as the BMW roundel up here on the C-pillar, which is a really interesting style touch. And I think this has now become the prettiest BMW SUV in the entire lineup. However, I don't necessarily agree with this whole coupifying SUVs thing. I think SUVs were meant to be practical and coupes were meant to be sporty, and kind of combining the two doesn't really do that much. Although in terms of the best cohesiveness of that concept, I think this actually stands near the top. So you're going to be able to get a BMW X2 S-Drive 28i starting at $36,400, although we have the X2 X-Drive 28i. So if I come around back here, I can show you that on the back is basically going to have a badge, whether it'll say S-Drive or X-Drive 28i. There's currently only one engine option, although the big difference here is that this one is all-wheel drive, base is front-wheel drive, which a lot of BMW purists are going to scoff at. I myself personally don't have a problem with BMW making a front-wheel drive car. I've always had a hunch that if anybody could build one of the most perfect driving front-wheel drive cars, it would be BMW, although we're going to see as soon as we get on the road in this car whether or not that hunch was actually put into practice with this car. So this one is the all-wheel drive. You're going to get a 2-liter engine. That's the only engine available on this car. It's going to develop 228 horsepower, although there is a more powerful version rumored to be on the way that should produce around 300 horsepower. There is no M version of this car. With the all-wheel drive, you're going to get 21 mpg in the city, 31 mpg on the highway, and combine about 25 in the city. I haven't quite matched that, but I've averaged about 24 in my driving. So now I'm going to go ahead and take you on the inside, and I'm going to show you more of this X2 on the interior, where it shares a lot in common with its X1 brother. So we have the M Sport package, which includes the keyless entry, oddly enough. The M Sport package is a $4,600 option. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. It's going to get you these nice 20-inch wheels and some other things that really don't belong in a sport pack, which I think is kind of odd. We have this really nice white leather. I absolutely adore the way this looks, especially with the orange, although don't let your kids near it because it will get dirty very quickly, as you'd expect from a white leather interior. I'm going to go ahead and step in and close the door and get the air conditioning going because we are in Florida and it is quite hot here. So right off the bat, as soon as it stops beeping at me, we can see that these gauges are a new design for BMW. I just got out of the BMW X4, which or 4 Series, I'm sorry, has the original gauges, the analog gauges, which are looking really old at this point. These are much fresher. They kind of look like screens when they're off, although when they come on, you can clearly tell that they are just analog gauges. They aren't digital displays like you would get in some Mercedes and Audi models. And actually, BMW does that as well on some of their models. But they are much cleaner and much more modern looking than an older BMW with the analog gauges. These little white needles, they turn orange at night, as do most of the other lights. It looks really pretty, and you do have ambient lighting that can change color in this car at night. It looks very, very nice. You have only a few options for different information on this screen. I'm going to go ahead and tap this little button, and you can see at the bottom there I have my average speed, my average MPG, the fuel range, and things like that. It's kind of small. You don't get a ton of information there, and you do have right below the tachometer, you have your current fuel economy. You do have a head-up display, which provides additional information, and you can have that display a couple things like speed limit, your current speed. You can have it display GPS data and things like that. Over here we have our basic headlight controls. Those are of course automatic. And now over here, I'm not going to go too deep into iDrive. If you watch my BMW 4 Series review, you'll get a pretty in-depth look at this. The one thing that's pretty interesting here on the X2 is that this is actually a touchscreen. BMW was one of the first to get rid of touchscreens in favor of their iDrive system, and now, interestingly, they have brought it back, which is pretty interesting, you know, considering that BMW was one of the first to get rid of it, and I'm not sure why, and it's kind of far away, but I like being able to touch some of these bigger menu items when I'm on the main screen. Down here, you have the radio preset buttons, which I really, really love. If you just sort of wipe your finger over them instead of actually tapping them, you get a preview of the channel that you have set there. I really, really like that. A lot of cars don't have radio preset buttons anymore, so I really appreciate those being there, as with the physical volume knob. Although the tuning switch is just this button, I'd rather it be a knob. You have your climate controls. Those look pretty standard as well. The cup holders are located here in front of the gear selector. I really wish that they were somewhere else, because as you can see, I have this small bottle here, but I have a big Yeti cup that can't fit in here because it keeps banging on the top, so I wish that was located in a different spot. Here you have the gear selector to control the 8-speed automatic transmission. It just goes all the way down into D, and then you can tap it over here for manual shifts, or that is also just the sport logic as well. It almost looks like a manual transmission. This isn't that digital shifter that you get on most BMWs. This is just a physical moving gate. It looks like a manual. Of course it is not. There is no manual optional or available on this car at all. Down here you have your traction control buttons. You have your sport, normal, and eco pro modes. I don't notice a huge difference between them, so I really don't use them a lot even when I go out and drive this car. It just, you know, the sport mode kind of changes the throttle mapping and the transmission, although you can do that independently as well, and it really doesn't make a huge difference in steering feel or anything like that. You have your parking sensors here, and then I believe this is hill descent if you're ever going to go off-roading in this car. Here's your iDrive controller. This latest iteration can let you type stuff out. You can spell out your address on here, although I've just relied on this voice command, which is really, really good on these BMW iDrive cars. And you have a couple of other controls for the stereo and this really, really nice wheel. I love the BMWs that come optional with this wheel. It feels a lot like what you would get in an M3 or an M4, and I really, really enjoy that. I really love all of the materials on this car. It's actually really, really nicely appointed. I love the white leather. I love this sort of brushed metallic, although it kind of feels a bit cheap. It looks really, really nice. We have the optional Harman Kardon stereo, which sounds pretty good, though it's not amazing. The biggest problem that I have is headroom. It's really, really tight in here. This is just not a very, very roomy cabin. I'm going to go ahead and step out so that you can see what I'm talking about. The seating position is pretty aggressive. You have these big bolsters, so if you prefer being comfortable, these bolsters are actually quite heavy, and they do go out and in a little bit. You have adjustment here, although they're a little bit tight and not all that comfortable for me. And this leather, although it is really nice quality, is really firm as well. You do have a panoramic moonroof, but it is small because of the coupe-like roof of this vehicle. You're not going to get that much room out of it. Now I'm going to go ahead and talk about the back seats, where you're really going to experience some of the compromises that this X2 is going to give you over an X1. So I'm going to go ahead and step in. Legroom is not great. I'm not a very tall person, and my knees are very close to touching. And then the roof is also really, really close. If you're above my height, and I'm only about 5'8", you are not going to fit well in this back seat. There is also a pretty big bump in the middle here, although the middle seat is somewhat usable. You do have your center console here, which can fold back, and there is some storage underneath there. I'm going to go ahead and show you that's where your USB is as well. There's no USBs back here, so if you do have kids in the back, they are not going to be able to charge. All they get is basically 2 cup holders here. So there's not too much back here to talk about. You can sort of see what I was saying with the ambient lighting, I hope. It is lit up in an orange right now, which is really nice. But yeah, this is mainly a back seat for children, and I wouldn't really recommend putting adults back here for a very long time. And then I'm going to go ahead and show you the trunk as well, where again, it's compromised. So you just pop this BMW roundel to open up the trunk. It is a power lift gate, and the trunk space is not that great. It's pretty small back here, although it does go a lot deeper when you reveal that. It is a very, very deep trunk. But when you opt for the X2 over the X1, you're going to go down from 27.1 cubic feet of storage down to 21.6. That is a really, really big difference. It is pretty practical as far as the seats folding down, because you can fold down all 3 sections of the seat to allow for a lot of different configurations here. So I'm going to go ahead and close that trunk via power. And now all that's left is to drive the X2. Now that I'm behind the wheel, I can start to talk a little bit about how this X2 drives, and does it keep that BMW quintessential driving experience that you've come to know and expect from BMW, even though this is a front-wheel drive based car and it is based on a mini platform. So right off the bat, we're pretty good on power. We have a 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder. It's not the same engine that you would get in the cars or some of the bigger SUVs like the X3. It makes 228 horsepower, which is less than some other cars like the X3 and the 4 Series and 3 Series, but it does have pretty good torque, 258 foot-pounds of torque. And it does go out through an 8-speed automatic, although I doubt it's the same ZF transmission that you'll find in rear-wheel drive based cars like the 4 Series. It doesn't seem to shift quite as smoothly or as quickly as those cars. And of course, this is a front-wheel drive based car, although we have the X-Drive 28i, which means we have all-wheel drive. So it is a front-wheel drive based car, but power is going out to all 4 wheels in this case. 0 to 60 isn't too bad. It's pretty respectable. It's 6.6 seconds if you get the front-wheel drive, although this all-wheel drive model is going to do the deed in 6.3 seconds, which is a little bit quicker. Power doesn't feel quite as responsive as some of the other BMWs I've driven. I'm going to go ahead and put my foot down. The Steptronic shifts pretty quickly. I really don't have too many faults with it. I like leaving it in its automatic mode most of the time. there is a mode over here. You can tap it over to the left, and that puts it in its sport logic. So basically what that's going to do is that's going to hold gears a little bit longer than it would, so it's going to wait a little bit longer to shift. And then if I want to go ahead, I can tap, and that's going to go ahead and put myself in manual mode. I can activate that either with the stick here, there's a manual shift on the stick, or now I can use the paddle shifters on the wheel. I really love the wheel that BMW uses on their quote sportier cars. It's very similar to what you would find in an M car, so I really like the way it feels. The paddles are really nice. The leather is really soft and chunky, so that's pretty good. Unfortunately, the steering feel in this particular car is completely lackluster. This is one area where the X2, and I'm assuming the X1 that this is based on, just completely fall short of what I would expect from a BMW. I recently drove the 430i, which is, again, not that powerful of a car. I drove a convertible, which is actually pretty comparable in weight to this, but the steering on the 4 Series just felt so much more alive than this car. I've been giving BMW some flack because their steering is just not as good since they've switched to electric units from, they used to use hydraulic, and some of their cars have fared pretty well. The 4 Series is actually still a very nice car steering wise. This just, I'm gonna go ahead and turn in now. No feel, no feedback whatsoever. It's completely vague and dead. I've driven other small luxury compact SUVs that I think their steering is actually better than this. So BMW usually is at the top of the heap when it comes to steering feel. Not in this case. This is just very lackluster, and I really don't get a lot of feedback from it. The ride, on the other hand, the handling is pretty good. So we have the M Sport Pack, which is one of the silliest named options I've ever seen because almost nothing on it is actually for sport. It's a $4,600 option, which is kind of a lot, and it gets you a lot of things that have nothing to do with sport. You get power folding mirrors, you get a garage door opener that's somewhere up here, I don't even know where they put that. You get the keyless entry, so you don't have to take your key out of your pocket to get into the car. You get this big panoramic moonroof, which is pretty nice, although not huge, as I showed you earlier. And you get the sport automatic transmission with different mapping, which that's pretty much the only sport option that you get on that whole sport package, which sounds kind of weird. I think you do get these 20-inch wheels too. I think a base X2 isn't going to have those. So appearance-wise, it does change some things like that. But I don't know if I would opt for it. I like the moonroof and things like that, but this car just isn't particularly sporty to drive. I'm going to go ahead, I'm on a roundabout now, and I'm kind of falling out of it. You just can't get around that high ride height, that taller center of gravity that this car has as an SUV. I think it just would have been better as a hatchback. I always wanted to drive that old 1 Series hatchback, which was rear wheel drive. That thing just looked fantastic, and instead BMW just had to bring SUVs. We got the X1, which was originally rear-wheel drive, and now they've switched that over to front-wheel drive. So handling is pretty good. The only problem with the handling is the ride is very stiff. So when you go over bumps, you're gonna feel it. You're gonna feel this suspension is very firm. This car has the optional $400 M Sport suspension, so I haven't driven the car without that, but I would easily say just forget about the Sport suspension. You don't need it in this car. It's already a very stiff ride, and just the way it leans in corners, and it's not that sporty of a car. Save your $400, don't get the Sport suspension. It's already a very uncomfortable car and pretty loud too. There's a lot of road noise coming from those big 20-inch wheels. It's very loud, especially on the highway in this car. It's just not very pleasant and not very quiet, so definitely don't go for that Sport suspension. And BMW likes to call this a Sport Activity Coupe, and you know, I kind of don't get it. I love the way this car looks. I think it's a very attractive package. I think a lot of people are going to be drawn to it based on the way it looks. But if you are coming out of something like a WRX or a GTI, this kind of seems like a nice progression, something, you know, more family oriented, but it just doesn't feel to me that much more practical. I know people really like the tall ride height provided by an SUV. You feel safer, you get to see over other traffic, but I just don't get that in this car. It just doesn't have any of that. It feels so low to the ground that I might as well be driving in a sedan. In fact, I've driven, you know, in traffic, and I've passed by Buicks and Impalas and things like that, and I don't feel that much taller than them. It has this weird seating position. I'm a pretty short guy, so I've had to raise the seat up quite a bit, so I do feel a little bit like I'm raised up from a sedan. But if you're taller, there is not a lot of headroom. The roof line is severely cut from a X1 on this sportier X2, so you're gonna probably have to lower this seat way down as low as it can go. Now granted, BMW doesn't give you a lot of headroom, and they've made up for that. This seat does go very low, but if you do put it as low as it needs to go, you're gonna feel like you're sitting on the ground, and it's this weird feeling of feeling high up and sort of low down on the roof. It's sort of a weird experience, and I don't really like it. If this was my money, I would personally go for any of the hot hatchbacks that are far cheaper than this car, with its $38,000 starting price, and as tested, this one is over $51,000. Give me a Golf R any day of the week. That's just me personally. I know a lot of people still want an SUV, and compared to some of the other cars that this competes against, you have the Mercedes GLA and the Audi Q3, and then you have a couple other odd competitors. You have the QX30, which is a very nice car, and it's a lot less expensive than this, although I think this interior just defeats the Infiniti by a large margin. So in a lot of ways, I think this BMW X2 is one of the best in its class. I personally would just go for a hatchback instead. And there are a lot of other problems that I have with this car as well. The blind spots are absolutely massive. You could lose a city bus in those blind spots, and that's just a side effect of coupifying the BMW X1. If all you want is the most practical small BMW SUV, and you're gonna actually spend less money, just get the X1. It's about a $2,500 savings over this car. Now granted, I think this car is a lot prettier than the X1, but you're definitely gonna have to put up with a few drawbacks. The trunk space isn't as big, the rear headroom is not as good, and neither is the front headroom for that matter. And you just look at those blind spots and you just can't see out of that, and that would be fine if this car had blind spot monitoring like almost every car in 2018 does. But it doesn't. This car just wasn't optioned with it. It's not available on the X2. You cannot get it on any X2, and I think that's a huge oversight. BMW did give this car lane departure warning, automatic emergency braking, and things like that, but no blind spot monitoring. I think that was just a weird choice that BMW made on this car that really needs it, to be honest. So there are some faults here on this car, but I think it is a solid overall offering. There's not a lot I can say about this class in general and the whole trend of coupifying SUVs. I'm really not on board with it, although this BMW X2 I think is now the prettiest SUV in BMW's lineup. So as far as styling is concerned, taking the X1 and making it into this more coupey looking thing, it looks great. But if they had just lowered it a little bit better and called it a hatchback, I would have liked it even more. So my overall score for the 2018 BMW X2 is going to be shop around. I like it a lot. I think it is one of the best cars in its class if you're looking at luxury compact SUVs, but I think if you're looking to spend a little bit less money, you might want to go and look at the Infiniti QX30, which drives very, very comparable to this. It drives very well, although it does so at a lower price point. I hope you've enjoyed this review, and if you want to see more, subscribe to the CarBuzz YouTube channel, and be sure to download our app on iOS and Android, and be sure to follow me at CarBuzzJared on Instagram so you can see the latest cars that I'm reviewing before they appear on CarBuzz. Hope you've enjoyed the video. See you next time.